Racist cop detains black woman, but one encrypted badge reveal twists the room into pure devastation. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. It was a cool evening in downtown Chicago, the kind of night where the bustling city lights cast long shadows on the crowded sidewalks. The city was alive with activity, but in the midst of the energy, Michelle Johnson, a well-dressed black woman in her early 30s, was walking home after a long day of work. She had just left the office of a corporate law firm where she had spent the past few years building her reputation as one of the top legal minds in her field. Her confident strides and composed demeanor reflected her determination and hard-earned success. But tonight, she had no idea that a routine walk home was about to turn her life upside down. As she walked down a quieter street, a police car slowed down beside her. Officer John Carter, a white cop in his late 40s, was driving. His eyes narrowed when he saw Michelle walking alone, and he made a quick U-turn before pulling up alongside her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, his voice sharp. "Can I ask what you're doing out here so late?" Michelle stopped and turned, her brows slightly furrowed, but her voice remained calm. "I'm just walking home from work," she replied. "Is there a problem, officer?" Officer Carter didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked her up and down with suspicion, as if her very presence on this street didn't belong. "You know, it's a little late for someone like you to be walking around here," he muttered, more to himself than to Michelle. She could feel the judgment in his words, but she refused to let it show. "I'm fine, officer. I live just a few blocks away," she said, trying to maintain control of the situation. But Officer Carter wasn't satisfied. "I'm gonna need to check your ID now," he said, his tone hardening. Michelle's patience was wearing thin, but she didn't raise her voice. She reached in her bag and pulled out her wallet, showing him her ID. But Carter didn't seem interested in the ID, instead demanding to see her bag. "Empty your pockets," he ordered, his voice growing more aggressive. Michelle stood her ground, her mind racing. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but she was beginning to feel the weight of his scrutiny, the unfairness of it all. "I'm telling you, I haven't done anything," she said firmly. Officer Carter didn't listen. He began rummaging through her bag, ignoring her protests. She could feel the eyes of the passing pedestrians on her, their whispers making her stomach churn. It was like she was on trial in the middle of the street, judged for the simple act of walking home while black. Just as Michelle was about to protest again, Carter pulled out a small object from her bag. A small, encrypted badge hidden inside an inconspicuous pocket. His eyes widened when he saw the badge, and he froze for a moment, confused by the discovery. "What is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. Michelle didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched him, waiting for him to fully process the revelation. The badge was one of her most closely guarded secrets, the symbol of her true identity. An undercover FBI agent working a high-profile case. She had kept it hidden for months, never revealing her true occupation to anyone outside her professional life. And now, in a moment of tension, it was the key to everything. Officer Carter's face drained of color as the realization hit him. He looked at her in disbelief, no longer the officer in control, but a man suddenly exposed for his assumptions and prejudices. He backed away slowly, stammering as he tried to make sense of what he had just uncovered. Michelle didn't speak. She knew the power of silence, the quiet strength that came with revealing your true identity at the right moment. The room, well, the street, was suddenly full of awkward tension. Passers-by, who had been watching the scene unfold, now stood frozen, realizing that they had witnessed an injustice in real time. The very man who had been the aggressor was now caught in his own trap, forced to confront the truth he had never expected to face. Michelle took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over her. She had faced discrimination before, but tonight, her silence, and her badge spoke louder than any words ever could. Michelle stood still, the tension in the air thick, as Officer Carter took a few cautious steps back, still holding the small, encrypted badge in his hand. His mind raced, his earlier confidence now replaced with confusion. He looked at the badge, then at Michelle, and for the first time, the weight of his assumptions and actions seemed to dawn on him. His grip on the badge tightened, and he glanced around, trying to gauge the reactions of the few onlookers who had gathered. The once quiet street now felt crowded, filled with the silent judgment of passers-by who were witnessing the unraveling of a moment that none of them had expected. Michelle, on the other hand, remained composed, her face a picture of calm defiance. Her hand was still by her side, and her gaze never left the officers. She knew exactly what was happening. Officer Carter looked at the badge, back at Michelle, and then fumbled for words. I didn't know, he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. His posture shifted, no longer the commanding officer, but a man caught in his own prejudices, the weight of his past actions suddenly bearing down on him. Michelle didn't speak. There was no need. The silence between them hung heavy. The man who had treated her with disdain just moments ago was now completely at a loss, unsure how to proceed. He opened his mouth again, but this time no words came out. Instead, he simply handed the badge back to Michelle, his face red with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he muttered, though it barely made it past his lips. The apology, though well-meaning, felt hollow. Michelle simply nodded, her expression unchanged, as if the apology didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was the realization that the officer's actions had consequences beyond what he could understand in the moment. As she took the badge back, she finally broke her silence, her voice steady and firm. "It's not about the apology," she said, her words cutting through the still air. "It's about understanding the consequences of your actions. You may have been ignorant of who I am, but you've now learned what it feels like to be judged based on assumptions, not facts." Carter's eyes widened, and his hands shook slightly as he stuffed them into his pockets. He wasn't sure how to respond to that. The realization hit harder than he expected. He had always prided himself on being a good cop, but the events of the last few minutes had shattered that illusion. Michelle had been nothing but patient, never raising her voice, never resisting. Yet it was he who had been wrong. It wasn't the badge that made him stop in his tracks. It was the power of Michelle's silence. In that silence, she held the room, held the situation, and, in a way, held him accountable. As Michelle tucked the badge back in her bag, she turned away from Officer Carter, her steps measured and deliberate. She didn't need to say more. The message had been made clear, not through anger, but through the quiet power of her identity. The officer watched her leave, the realization settling in that this encounter would stay with him long after she had disappeared into the night. It wasn't just a black woman he had judged. It was someone far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. And in that moment, the roles had reversed. The night, once just another routine evening in the city, was now forever marked by this unexpected twist of fate. As Michelle walked away, her heart was steady, but her mind was racing. She had faced countless moments in her life where people had judged her based on the color of her skin, but this moment was different. It was a rare instance where the power of her silence had done all the talking. Officer Carter remained frozen in place, his eyes following her retreating figure as the weight of the situation sank in. He had thought he was in control, but in reality, Michelle had been the one in control all along. His hands were still trembling slightly as he stood there, unsure of what to do next. He had never thought of himself as someone who would treat a person like Michelle that way. He was a cop, and he believed in justice, but in this moment, he realized that justice wasn't just about the law. It was about treating people with respect and understanding. The realization stung. For the first time in a long while, Officer Carter felt small, powerless, and embarrassed. He wanted to say something, to apologize properly, but he knew that words wouldn't fix what had just happened. Michelle was no longer just a woman walking home. She was an embodiment of something larger than him, someone who had seen the world for what it was and still stood tall. As she rounded the corner and disappeared from his view, Officer Carter slowly walked back to his patrol car, his mind filled with a mix of guilt and confusion. He didn't know what he had expected, but it certainly wasn't this. He had expected to finish his shift and go home, but now his perception of what it meant to be a good cop had been forever altered. Michelle continued walking, her stride confident, yet her thoughts lingered on the encounter. She didn't let it affect her. She had learned long ago that she couldn't control the actions of others, only how she responded to them. As she walked past the city's busy streets, with the lights flickering above, she couldn't help but think about how the world worked. How often people in power abused it. How often they made assumptions without truly seeing the people in front of them. But Michelle knew better. She had seen the ugliness of the world up close, and she had learned to fight through it. She had fought her whole life to get to where she was, and she wouldn't let this incident define her. It was a brief encounter, and as far as she was concerned, it was over. What mattered now was what she would do next. She had a mission, one that was much bigger than this. She had to remain focused. As she reached the entrance to her apartment building, she entered the lobby, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space. She didn't look back. She was done with the past. Now, she had to prepare for the next challenge that awaited her. But as Michelle entered her apartment and closed the door behind her, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She was tired, but more than that, she was proud. Proud that she had stood up without ever raising her voice. Proud that she had made her point, even without saying a word. And as she sat down at her desk and opened her laptop, the phone rang. It was her superior. "Michelle," the voice said, calm and authoritative. "We need you back in action. The investigation is heating up. You've done well so far. Now let's finish this." Michelle looked out the window for a moment, her eyes reflecting the city lights. She knew she had more to do, and she would do it on her terms. Whatever happened, whatever challenges came her way, Michelle Johnson would face them head on, always keeping her head high. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a force to be reckoned with, and no one, not even Officer Carter, could take that away from her. Michelle sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face. Her thoughts were focused, sharp, as she scanned through the latest files on the case. The phone call from her superior earlier had been a reminder that her work was far from over. The investigation had taken a new turn, and she could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing on her shoulders. But it was a weight she had grown accustomed to. As an FBI agent, Michelle had faced danger and intrigue countless times, but tonight, it felt different. The events with Officer Carter earlier had reminded her of the constant battle she fought, not just against criminals, but against the prejudice that still ran deep in society. It wasn't the first time she had encountered racism, but it was the first time she had seen it so clearly from someone in a position of power. The encounter had shaken her, but it had also reinforced her resolve. She knew the system needed to change, and it was people like her who had to be the ones to make that change. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. The case was heating up, and she had to stay ahead. She opened a new file on her laptop, reviewing the details of the operation she had been assigned to lead. The investigation had been progressing, but the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. There were powerful people involved, people who would do anything to keep their secrets hidden. As Michelle read through the files, her mind began to formulate a plan. She needed to get deeper into the web of corruption that was slowly unraveling, and she needed to move quickly. Her phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, an encrypted message from her partner, David. She opened it immediately. "Meet me at the safe house. We need to talk." The intel we've been waiting for just came through. The urgency in his message was clear. Michelle grabbed her coat and her bag, quickly gathering her things. She didn't have time to waste. She stepped out of her apartment and into the cool night air. The city felt different tonight, quieter somehow. The streets were still busy, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. As she walked to her car, Michelle's thoughts wandered back to the events earlier that day. She had hoped that the interaction with Officer Carter would be an isolated incident, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the tip of the iceberg. There was something deeper at play here, something that needed to be exposed. She started the car, the engine purring to life as she drove through the city streets. Her mind was focused, and her eyes were set on the road ahead. The drive felt like it took forever, but in reality, it was only a short distance. When she arrived at the safe house, David was already waiting outside, pacing. As soon as he saw her, he walked toward the car. "Michelle, you won't believe what we just uncovered," he said, his voice low. Michelle followed him inside, where a small team was gathered around a table covered with papers and documents. David handed her a folder. "This is it," he said. "The final piece of the puzzle. We've got them." Michelle's heart raced as she flipped through the folder. The names, the connections, the evidence, it was all there. This was it. The breakthrough they had been waiting for. It was time to take the next step. The investigation was about to go public, and they needed to move fast. As Michelle looked around at her team, she felt a sense of pride. They had come this far together, and they were about to expose the truth. The people responsible for the corruption, the injustice, the lies, they were about to be brought to light. And Michelle, with her quiet strength and unyielding resolve, was ready to lead the charge. Michelle sat in the safe house, the file David had handed her still open on the table in front of her. The room was filled with tension as her team gathered around, their eyes focused on her. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above was the only sound that filled the space, amplifying the gravity of the situation. This was the moment they had all been working toward. The evidence they had uncovered was the key to exposing the network of corruption that had been lurking in the shadows for far too long. Michelle had seen the inner workings of power before, but this was different. This wasn't just about breaking up a crime ring or putting away bad actors. It was about dismantling a system that had protected those in power for years, hiding their misdeeds behind the badge, the uniform, and the status they had earned through deception. The names, the connections, the web they had painstakingly uncovered. It was all right here. But with this kind of breakthrough came a risk, and Michelle knew it. The people they were about to expose were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to protect themselves. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up without hesitation. It was a message from her superior. "We got a problem. Someone in your team has been compromised. Meet me at the usual place. We need to talk." Michelle's stomach dropped. She looked around at her team. They all seemed focused, unaware of the shift that had just happened. She had no time to waste. "David," she said, her voice calm but serious, "get everyone ready. We need to move." David nodded, his face grim. He knew this wasn't a drill. Michelle stood up, her mind racing. A compromised team member? It could be anyone. Someone in her team had been feeding information to the wrong people, and now everything was on the line. She grabbed her coat and her bag, and as she reached the door, she turned to face her team. "Stay sharp. We don't know who we can trust," she said. They nodded in unison, understanding the weight of her words. As Michelle stepped out into the cool night air, her thoughts were clear. She had to find out who was behind the betrayal before it was too late. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As she walked toward her car, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an alert from her. "Secure system." She glanced at it quickly, her heart racing. It was a message from the inside. "They know. They're coming for you. Get out now." Her instincts kicked in. She couldn't waste a second. She didn't know who had sent the message, but it didn't matter. She had to get to the meeting point and figure out who was trying to sabotage everything. As Michelle drove through the city, her eyes scanning the streets, the quiet was deafening. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every turn she made, every stoplight she passed, it felt like someone was right behind her, waiting for her to slip up. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything. The meeting spot was an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a place that had seen its share of shady dealings over the years, and it was where her superior had always met her when things got tense. As she pulled into the parking lot, her eyes immediately darted to the shadows, looking for any sign of danger. There was no one in sight, but Michelle knew better than to be fooled by appearances. She stepped out of the car, her hand instinctively moving to her side, where her weapon was holstered. She walked toward the entrance of the warehouse, her steps deliberate, her mind fully focused on the task at hand. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. The dim light from a single overhead bulb barely illuminated the space, but Michelle's eyes were sharp. She scanned the room, her senses heightened. "You're here," a voice said from the darkness. Michelle tensed. It was her superior. She could hear the calm in his voice, but she also sensed the urgency beneath it. "We've got a bigger problem than we thought," he continued, stepping into the light. "Someone inside the department is covering their tracks, and they're using people you know to do it." Michelle's heart raced. The stakes had just been raised, and she knew that time was running out. She had to move quickly, but this was no longer just about exposing corruption. It was about protecting everyone she had worked with. She nodded. "We'll get them," she said, her voice steady. "No one's getting away with this." The final piece of the puzzle was in place, and now it was time to finish what they had started. Michelle's heart raced as she stood in the abandoned warehouse, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on her. Her superior had just dropped a bombshell. Someone inside the department was working against them, covering their tracks, and using people she trusted to keep everything hidden. This was no longer just about corruption in the city. It was about betrayal from within. She had to stay focused. The lives of everyone involved in the investigation were on the line. Her thoughts were interrupted as her superior spoke again, his voice low and serious. "We've narrowed it down. There's someone high up in the department we need to look at. We're not just dealing with small-time corruption here, Michelle. This is a setup, and it's a big one." The words hit Michelle like a punch to the gut. She had known that things were complicated, but she hadn't expected them to be this deep. Someone in her own team, someone she had worked closely with, might be behind it all. "Who?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Her superior paused, then handed her a folder. "Take a look at this. It's all connected to someone you know. We need to move fast. Whoever is behind this is always one step ahead. They've been covering their tracks for too long." Michelle opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. The names and dates blurred together as her mind raced to connect the dots. The deeper she looked, the more she realized how far the corruption ran. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about protecting a system that had failed so many for years. The people in the department who had been entrusted to serve justice had betrayed that trust. And now, Michelle was the one who had to stop them. She closed the folder and looked up at her superior. "We need to get to the bottom of this. If they're watching us, we can't waste any time. We have to act now before they make their move." Her superior nodded, his face grim. "You're right. We need to move quickly, and we need to be smart about it. If we make one wrong move, everything falls apart." Michelle knew what he meant. If they were discovered, the entire operation would be compromised. They couldn't afford any mistakes. She turned to leave the warehouse, her mind already working on the next steps. She had to find out who was responsible for the betrayal, and she had to do it before it was too late. As she stepped out into the cool night, the weight of the task ahead pressed down on her. There was no turning back now. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to let everything fall apart. Michelle got in her car and started the engine, her eyes scanning the empty streets as she drove toward the next location. She had a plan in mind, but she knew better than to trust anyone right now. She had to rely on herself. As she arrived at the meeting spot, she checked her surroundings. There was no sign of anyone yet, but Michelle wasn't taking any chances. She approached the building cautiously, every sense alert. She pushed open the door, stepping into the dimly lit space. Her team was already waiting, looking anxious but ready. "What's the status?" she asked as she entered. David stepped forward, holding up a phone. "We've got a lead. Someone inside the department is trying to sabotage the investigation. They're sending messages to cover their tracks. We need to trace the source." Michelle nodded, her mind already calculating the best way to move forward. "Let's get to work. We're running out of time." The urgency was palpable in the room. They all knew what was at stake. Michelle glanced at the team, her eyes determined. "We're going to expose this corruption, no matter who's behind it. But we have to be careful. One wrong move, and it all falls apart." The team nodded, their resolve matching hers. They had all come this far together, and they weren't going to let it end now. Michelle turned to David, her voice firm. "Get the equipment ready. We're going to need every tool we have to track down the source." We move fast, and we move together. David nodded and began preparing the equipment, his face set in determination. Michelle stood by, watching her team work. She had always trusted them, but now, with the stakes higher than ever, she knew they had to rely on each other more than ever before. This was no longer just about taking down criminals. It was about saving everything they had worked for. Michelle had never been one to back down from a fight, and she wasn't about to start now. She looked at her team, her eyes steady. Let's finish this. Michelle paced the room, her mind racing as the plan took shape. The lead was finally in their hands, but time was running out. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Every second counted now. Her team was ready, and they were prepared to move quickly. But Michelle knew they were up against a dangerous opponent, someone who had been pulling the strings from within the department for far too long. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. There was a traitor among them, and until she found out who, she would have to rely on her instincts and her team. David looked up from the desk, his fingers flying over the keyboard. I've traced the messages. They're coming from a secure government server, but the origin point is masked. It's someone high up, Michelle. Someone with clearance. His voice was tense, but there was a sense of determination in it. Michelle nodded, her thoughts clear and precise. We're going to find them. This isn't just about taking down the criminals. It's about exposing the system that's been protecting them. She paused, scanning the room. Her team was in position, every member focused, ready to carry out the mission. David, get the data feeds connected to the secure servers. We need full access. If we're going to track down this person, we need to know everything they've done. David's eyes narrowed as he adjusted his screen. On it. This is going to take a few minutes, but we'll have it. Michelle turned to the rest of the team. Everyone else, stay alert. We're not just after the people who've been feeding information. We're after the ones pulling the strings. The air in the room felt thick with tension. As her team moved to their stations, Michelle glanced at the map pinned to the wall. It was dotted with locations, each representing a lead they had chased down. Each one brought them closer to the truth, but Michelle knew the final confrontation would be the hardest. The enemies they were up against weren't just criminals. They were part of a larger system of power that had worked to keep the truth buried. It wasn't just about taking down one person. It was about exposing the entire network. Michelle's phone buzzed on the table, snapping her back to the present. It was another encrypted message. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. The message was short, but it was enough to make her blood run cold. They know. They're coming for you. Michelle felt a chill run down her spine. She had expected retaliation, but this was faster than she anticipated. Whoever was behind this had moved quickly. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. The betrayal ran deeper than she had imagined. David, are we in? She asked, her voice sharp and urgent. David didn't look up from his screen, but gave a quick nod. We have access to their communications. We got a backdoor into their system now. Michelle exhaled slowly, her mind working as she processed the information. Good. Prepare to move out. We're going to confront them before they have a chance to cover their tracks. As she turned to face the team, the room seemed to close in. The sense of urgency was overwhelming, but Michelle was calm. She had been in situations like this before. She knew what needed to be done. It was time to take the fight to them. Let's move, she said firmly. With that, they were off. The drive to the next location was quick, but Michelle's mind kept racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The stakes had never been higher. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous this investigation became. But Michelle wasn't going to stop now. They were so close. When they arrived at the safe house, Michelle immediately went inside, her team close behind. The room was dimly lit, and the tension was palpable. They weren't just up against criminals anymore. They were up against a system that would stop at nothing to keep its secrets hidden. Michelle looked around at her team, all of them ready for whatever was coming next. They had been working together for months, and now it was time to finish what they had started. She knew the risks, but she also knew that they had the truth on their side. We'll take them down, Michelle said, her voice steady. But we have to move fast. No hesitation. Her team nodded in unison, the determination in their eyes matching her own. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, and they were ready to make it count. Michelle stood at the center of the safe house command room, the low hum of computers filling the tight silence. Her team worked around her with focused urgency, their eyes darting between digital maps, encrypted message logs, and live data feeds. Every detail mattered now. Every delay carried a risk they could not afford. The truth was close, close enough that Michelle could almost feel it tightening around the room like an unseen force. David adjusted his headset and called out from across the table, his voice trembling slightly with anticipation. "Michelle, we have traced the last message through their backdoor system. It bounced through multiple encrypted servers, but we finally narrowed the origin down to a single location." His finger tapped a blinking red point on the digital map. Michelle stepped closer, her eyes locking on the coordinates. It was a government administrative building downtown, one she had visited countless times during briefings and official meetings. A place she had always considered safe. Now, it was the center of the deception. "Of course," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "They hid in plain sight." David nodded, confirming her suspicion. Someone with a high-level security clearance is orchestrating everything from inside that building. And based on the timestamps, they have been monitoring your movements since the beginning of the investigation. The words settled over the room like a heavy cloud. Michelle took a slow breath, letting the information sink in. She had known this was big, but she had not realized just how deeply embedded the corruption was. It reached places she had trusted, people she had worked alongside for years. "Then we take it to them," Michelle said calmly. "We confront the truth where it has been hiding." Her team exchanged nervous glances. The tension was palpable, but so was their loyalty. They trusted her judgment, her leadership. She had guided them through complex cases before, but this one was different. This time, the enemy had the advantage of power and position. Still, Michelle's voice remained steady. "We move carefully. We do not alert anyone inside, and we do not communicate through any channels they can intercept. We go in silent and gather what we need." David looked up, concern etched across his face. "Michelle, you do realize what this means? Whoever is behind this, they know who you are. They know what you can do. And if they have been watching you, then they are expecting you." Michelle did not flinch. "Let them expect me. I'm not here to hide. I am here to bring the truth into the open." The room fell quiet for a moment, her quiet conviction anchoring everyone in place. Then her superior's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that trust was fragile now. Someone close had betrayed them, someone she had once relied on. The thought pushed her forward. She gathered her encrypted badge, slipping it into her pocket, feeling its familiar weight, a reminder of who she was and what she stood for. As the team began preparing their equipment, Michelle stepped aside and looked through the dusty warehouse window toward the distant city skyline. The lights flickered like faint signals calling her toward the next chapter of the mission. She felt no fear, only clarity. All roads had led to this moment. Someone inside that building had orchestrated lies, manipulation, and sabotage. Someone had tried to intimidate her. Someone had hoped she would back down, but they had underestimated her resolve. Michelle straightened, her eyes sharp with purpose. "Everyone ready?" she asked, turning back to her team. They gathered their gear and nodded. "Then let's go," she said. "It is time to reveal the truth hiding behind their walls." And with that, they moved out into the night, stepping toward the heart of the deception, toward the confrontation that would change everything. Michelle and her team arrived at the government building, their steps synchronized as they moved with purpose. The building loomed ahead, its exterior cold and imposing, a symbol of the power and corruption they were about to confront. The night had fallen quiet, the streets eerily empty, as if the city itself held its breath. Michelle's heart beat steadily in her chest, but her mind raced. She had never faced a challenge like this before. They were up against a system that had been in place for years, a network built on secrecy and manipulation. And yet, they were going to expose it all, piece by piece. As they approached the entrance, Michelle motioned for the team to stop. She looked around, scanning their surroundings, making sure there were no surprises waiting. Her instincts told her that they were being watched. She couldn't let her guard down for a second. "Stay close," Michelle whispered. "We move in silent. No mistakes. We're not here to draw attention." Her team nodded, each member understanding the weight of what was about to unfold. The building had an eerie stillness to it, as if it was waiting, too, for something to happen. They slipped through the shadows, moving quickly toward the back entrance, where they would access the security control room. Michelle's mind was sharp, focused on every step, every detail. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. The traitor could be anywhere, and whoever was pulling the strings inside this building would be ready for them. They reached the back door, and David, the tech expert, quickly went to work, bypassing the security system with practiced ease. The team stood in silence, their breath shallow, each of them aware of the danger they were in. After what seemed like an eternity, the door clicked open, and Michelle signaled for the team to enter. They moved quickly down the narrow hallway, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of their mission. They were close now, and Michelle could feel the tension building in her chest. The control room was just ahead. They had one shot at this. As they approached the door, Michelle's phone buzzed in her pocket. She quickly pulled it out, her eyes scanning the message. It was from her superior, the one person who knew everything about the operation. The message was brief, but it sent a chill down her spine. "They know you're here." It's a trap. Her heart skipped a beat. They had been set up. Someone inside the building had tipped them off. But it didn't matter now. They were already too far in. Michelle looked up at her team, her expression unreadable. "We keep moving. We've come this far, and we're not turning back now." They nodded, their resolve unwavering. This was the moment they had been working toward for months. The door to the control room stood before them, a barrier to the truth. Michelle reached for the handle, her hand steady despite the urgency pulsing through her. She opened the door, and the team rushed inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with rows of monitors, each one displaying live feeds from different corners of the building. At the center of the room was a large desk, and behind it sat the person they had been looking for, the mastermind of the entire operation. Michelle's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the face. It was someone she had trusted, someone she had worked alongside for years. The traitor was none other than her former mentor, Agent Wilson. He looked up at them, his face betraying no emotion, only a cold, calculating stare. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice low and calm. "You should have stayed out of it, Michelle. You were never supposed to find out." Michelle's mind raced, the shock of the betrayal hitting her like a wave. She had trusted him, believed in him. But now, all of that trust had been shattered in an instant. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with disbelief. Wilson leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "Because the system is broken, Michelle, and I've been trying to fix it. The only way to take control is to own it all. You wouldn't understand." Michelle shook her head, the words barely registering. It was all too much. Everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for, had been undermined by someone she had once looked up to. "It ends here," she said, her voice firm. "This stops now." Wilson's expression hardened, and for a moment, Michelle thought he might try to fight back. But instead, he simply stood, his hands raised in mock surrender. "You're too late," he said. "The system is already in motion. You can't stop it." Michelle felt a wave of anger and frustration wash over her, but she refused to let it control her. "Watch me," she replied, her voice unwavering. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot.